Now we're going to talk a little bit about bioenergetics. Bioenergetics is the field of biology that concerns energy flow through living systems. It studies the processes involved in transferring, and transforming of energy in living systems. It includes things like enzymatic processes, metabolic pathways, cellular respiration, and photosynthesis. The goal is essentially to describe how living organisms acquire, transfer, and transform energy in order to do biological work. It's really important to note that while matter and energy move together through an ecosystem when they're contained in organic compounds like food, they follow different paths at the beginning and the end of food chains and food webs. Producers like plants and algae get matter from carbon dioxide, water, and minerals, usually from the soil. They get their energy from sunlight. Heterotrophs get both matter and energy from food. All of the matter is eventually converted back into carbon dioxide, water, minerals, and some metabolic waste, by decomposers usually, while all of the energy leaves the ecosystem as heat. This heat ultimately flows out into space. Matter cycles continuously through an ecosystem. The atoms that make up that matter are used over and over again, while energy flows through the ecosystem and eventually it ends up in space. New energy needs to be added all the time, and this new energy is usually added by the sun. As it moves through a food chain, energy is transformed from one type of energy to another and transferred from one place or organism to another. But again, ultimately it ends up in space, usually in the form of heat. Let's talk a bit about metabolism. Metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions that occur in an organism. All of life's processes are due to chemical reactions. Whether we're talking about memories or thoughts or movements, they all happen because of chemical reactions. We're going to divide metabolism into two main phases. Catabolism refers to chemical metabolic reactions that break down molecules. In lots of cases, these catabolic reactions release the potential energy found in chemical bonds between monomers. These reactions are oftentimes called exergonic because they release energy to the environment. Anabolic or anabolism, these reactions combine monomers to build large polymers or macromolecules. Anabolic reactions usually require an input of kinetic energy to create bonds between monomers. Usually, anabolic reactions are said to be endergonic reactions because they require an input of energy from the environment. So here we can see an exergonic reaction. This is the amount of energy, free energy stored in the bonds of the reactants. Well, as the reaction happens, notice that energy is released to the environment and the amount of energy in the products is less than the initial amount of energy in the reactants. We say that this reaction has a negative delta G. That means it's releasing energy, free energy in this case. This reaction down here is an endergonic reaction. Here we're looking at the amount of energy in the reactants. As the reaction happens, energy is absorbed from the environment. Here's the energy in the products. Notice that the amount of energy in the products is greater than the amount of energy in the reactants. This reaction has a positive delta G, positive free energy. So again, bioenergetics. For living organisms, the chemical energy of life is found in chemical bonds. The processes of cell respiration and digestion are usually catabolic processes which release energy for use by cells. The process of photosynthesis is an anabolic process. It allows producers to store solar energy in the bonds of sugar usually. So let's also take a minute and talk about metabolic pathways. So everything that happens in a cell happens because of chemical reactions. We talked about that already. But most of these processes are complicated and require lots of chemical reaction steps to take place. Metabolic pathways are enzyme-regulated sets of biochemical pathways that lead to either biosynthesis or breakdown. Examples of common metabolic pathways in biology include glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, the Calvin cycle. We might even think of all of photosynthesis, all of cell respiration, and digestion as metabolic pathways. Each step of a metabolic pathway consists of a separate chemical reaction, and the products of one reaction are typically the reactants for the next reaction. Each step is catalyzed by a different and specific enzyme. So here we see a diagrammatic illustration of a metabolic pathway up top. So here's our initial reactant. Enzyme 1 catalyzes this first reaction and converts substance A into B. Enzyme 2 catalyzes the second step and converts B into C. Enzyme 3 catalyzes the next step and converts C into the actual product the metabolic pathway is designed to make, and that's product D. Here's an important point. Many of the metabolic pathways, such as glycolysis and Krebs cycle, are conserved across almost all of life. This indicates that organisms inherited these metabolic pathways from a common ancestor, that we're all related. Let's also mention the laws of thermodynamics. The study of heat energy is referred to as thermo, and its properties are referred to as dynamics. The first law of thermodynamics is also known as the law of conservation of energy. It basically says that energy can't be created nor destroyed, but it can be transformed from one type of energy to another, or it can be transferred from one location or one molecule to another molecule or location. The second law of thermodynamics says that every energy transfer increases the entropy of the universe. That's important. Entropy is essentially a quantity that measures the unavailability of a system's thermal energy for mechanical work. It's often interpreted as the degree of disorder or randomness in a system. Essentially, the second law says that every energy transfer, some of the system's energy is converted to heat, and that this heat is then unavailable to do work. So even though the amount of energy in the universe is constant, the amount of available usable energy is constantly decreasing because lots of it is being converted to heat energy or thermal energy.